Hi, welcome to lesson 4. We're using acrylics in this lesson. I'm going to show you a little bit about how I mix colors on the paper and off the paper. And we're going to use really bright and colorful acrylics to give you a very expressive portrait. So before we begin, I just want to show you a couple of examples of acrylics on paper. This one is done just on watercolor cold press paper, and I use the acrylics in quite a light way on her face, and adding a little bit of water to make it almost like a watercolor. So I'll show you a little bit how to do that. And then we use contrasting colors for the background and her hair. This one was applied with many different colors of acrylics and in quite an impasto-ish way, so quite thickly, not mixing too much and trying to get some contrasting colors. And I did a background on this one as well. And all three of these portraits are images of people who I found on Sketchy. This one I really like. I like how there's very defined areas of different colors, the contrasting colors between the yellow and the purple, and then the green and the orange in the background. And I kept it quite fresh, not blending too much. I think I blended off the paper and just added the blocks of color on the portrait. So we're going to try and do a little bit more of this one and this one today. And we're going to be using a cardboard background. So this is actually just the end of a pad of watercolor paper that I keep. And I'm going to be using Riotech, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, Riotech acrylic paints. So let's just paint the background of this. It doesn't really matter what size brush. Try and get a larger brush. And I'm just going to go directly on with the acrylic paints onto the background to create a base on the cardboard, because it does soak up a lot of the acrylic. And I'd like the background to be white so that the bright colors that we use really show up and shine through. You want to try and get it as flat as possible. So once I've filled it all in, then I'll go over very lightly with the paintbrush and get a nice light and smooth texture. In this portrait that we're going to do today, I'm using my reference photo is from Sketchy, and I'm using Gerald Cardona, or Gerald Cardona, however you like to say it. So you can find him on Sketchy. He's a great artist over there and does some really neat stuff with portraits. So you have to check him out. But I like this pose because having a shoulder on this side and then the neck with the head turned, it looks great on paper. It's a good pose for a composition. Okay, so we've covered our piece in white. We're going to let that dry. I've actually got one that I've already done. So I'll let this one dry for another time. And you may have to paint on both sides of your cardboard. This side really cover, and this side just paint one side, because sometimes, if not, the cardboard will bow. So I have my white, and I'm going to create a palette just on this piece of card for you so that you can see when I'm mixing colors. So I'm going to get my white just to have, as a mixer if I want to lighten colors or for highlights. And then I've chosen 4 other colors. We're going to take this one, which is, it's just called Bright Red. And then this one, Bright Yellow. This one, which is just turquoise. And then I've got fluorescent magenta too. I'll just use the white palette for that one. There we go. So I have my 4 colors and my white. I'm just going to set these to the side here. So let's start, and we're going to start again by just sketching the outline of Gerald's face and try and get his features. Again, I'm just going to mix and move this in so you can see a little bit. And just take some white and mix some yellow and go with the lightest, and we're just going to sketch directly with the paint onto the cardboard. So again, I know that the back of his shoulder is around here, so I'm going to just mark it like that, and then the top of his head I want to be around here. So if this is his shoulder, I know that he has the t-shirt that goes down like that, and we'll put his shoulder in straight away. And really look at the angle. So remember, this is completely vertical, so you want to do a vertical line here with a little bit of a touch of angle at the bottom. And I know we're going to do a background quickly afterwards, so I can just roughly sketch in the shape of his head and not worry too much about going outside in the background area, because we'll be filling it in with a darker color. His neck comes up and his ear is out here. Okay, so I think I have the basic shape. This is the area that I want to start the painting in. I'm going to take a slightly smaller brush, and now I'm going to darken the yellow by adding just a little bit of the pink, the fluorescent pink. And I'm going to mark in his hair. So I'm looking at the shape that his hairline makes. And then I'll just fill that in. We'll come back to that and add some details towards the end. And I'm going to try and get the right shapes of all his features. So his eyebrow, his other eyebrow, his nose, there's quite a lot of dark area here under his eye. And we can correct this because you can go over with acrylics. If I filled in a little area that I didn't really want to, I can just go back and put some white over or put a lighter color over. So I'm not too bothered. I just want to get the rough idea where all his features are, and then we can go in with a little bit more detail later. So I don't want to focus too much on each individual feature of his face. We're going to try and get the whole array of all his features in so that they're on the paper, and then we can start focusing a little bit on the color that we're going to choose after we've got all his features mapped out. Okay, so then he has shadow underneath his lips. Actually, I'm going to just add this all the way around. It's fun starting off in a different color too, because then your fear is almost taken away as soon as you start the portrait. If you really wanted to, you could sketch first with pencil, if that makes you feel more comfortable. But just try sketching with paint. You never know, you may like it. Okay, so we've got the basic idea of his face in here. I want to make his face quite bright, and then we're going to use the other colors to go into all the shadow areas. So I'm going to try not to touch the areas where there looks like there's the brightest light. So on top of his nose, for example, right there at the tip, and then right here, and then also just on the top of his brow. This kind of comes out here. And even though his ear looks to be quite bright, he does have a light on the tip of his ear, and right here it's all very, very light, so I'm going to leave that up there. And just there. And this is darker. And then underneath his nose, there's a couple of areas on his chin which we can leave to the brightest lights. So I'm just really filling in everywhere other than where it's really bright. If I squint my eyes, I think even the whites of his eyes are slightly darker than the tip of his nose and the top of his forehead. So we're not going to go with the yellow that we just did. I'm going to mix a lighter yellow. And I find if my paintbrush gets all clogged up, what I do is I twirl it, and that way it takes off all the paint on the metal part that holds the bristles. So this light yellow I'm just going to put in here, acting as the white of his eyes, but because they're not super bright, I think we'll just do that. Oh, and this area is darker. And then don't forget the neck. Whilst you're working on the face, don't forget the neck, because that's part of his whole portrait, is the neck as well. Okay. So his hair, I think I'm going to use the red for his hair. It's a nice dark contrasting color. I'm going to try and keep a little bit of the orange that's underneath visible, especially when you see the light areas on his hair. And for this I'm just using a number 6. I could go smaller, but I think I'm going to leave it quite large so that I'm not concentrating too much on details. Afterwards I can come in with a small brush and get more of a definition in the hairline. Right here it falls really close. I guess it's the part you can't really see on the other side of his face. And that's all I'm going to do right now. Maybe just add a little bit up here because it looks a little flat. Okay. I'm going to take a smaller brush. I have a number 4 here. And I just want to go in and capture his eyebrows in the same color as his hair. And then the other one. Now I don't usually wait for layers to dry, other than the base that I did with acrylic, because I like seeing and I like the feel of the paint when it's still wet underneath, and sometimes it catches the color that you're using. which is really fun. And just get his eyes in, trying to make sure they're the same shape as what I'm seeing in the photo. And then the bridge of his nose. It's maybe too big a bump. Okay. I'm just going to leave that like that. A little bit more dark underneath here. Now let's go over to his ear. I know that there are some darker areas over here. And look at the shapes that these dark areas make. Okay, so we have that, and then there's a little dark area right here by his ear, and then we have the nostrils. I'm going to take an even smaller brush for that. I have a number 2 because I want to get the shape right. So his nose came down here, and he's got the little top bit. And then one nostril is here, and the other nostril, oh, that's a little bit too close, and around. Okay, there is an area which is darker but not that dark, so I'm mixing a little bit of the yellow with the red. Just want to add that down here, and then also around his nose and under here right by his eye. Again, roll your brush on a board or a tissue to get the excess off. Especially when you have a small brush, you want to create detail, and sometimes you pick up too much acrylic paint. So now I'm going to look at all the darker areas like that maybe are in the same tone as his hair. I think I need to lighten just up under here because I think I've got the angle wrong of his eyebrow. So I can go in with that, like that. That's better. And then the angle here is slightly off. There. And you can mix actually on the paper as well, or on the card. So say for example I'm doing this shadow, and I'll do this one at the same time. And this one underneath his mouth. I'm going to take a little bit of the yellow and a little bit of the white, and I'm going to just blend into the red. And I'll do the same over here. Now let's get back to the darker color. I want to try and capture his mouth. So I start off with the little shape on the top lip and then come over here and then pull the paintbrush up to create that little curve. Okay. Oh, and we should have lightened that shadow slightly under here. Just slightly. Because it's not quite as dark as his eyes, so you have to always be comparing the different values and the lights and darks. The chiaro oscuro. Okay. I'm coming in with the white just to lighten his top lip, but I'm going to go back in with a darker color underneath while it's still wet. And then wash off my brush and just blend those two. Because I want the top to be lighter, but it doesn't have to be white because it's not white. Just giving a little bit more of a volume. Okay, let's get under his chin a little bit darker. And also down here. And I'm taking a little bit of the yellow and actually mixing it into the darker areas that I've just put down here. And we can blend it actually on the card. And there we go. And his beard does creep up here, so I'm going to blend it a little bit here on the side of his chin, or his jawline rather, and then also around his mouth. It's very slight and not too dark, but it is darker than his skin tone. And then around here, I'm not going to do individual hairs. I just want to create tonal differences with the paint. Okay, let's have a look. Here's a lighter area right here and all along here. And I'm going to try and capture his nose shape. And really look at what you see, not what you think it should be like. Looking at the shapes of the shadows. There's a lot of paint on my brush. Just going to blend this down here. Now I like to use my acrylics straight from the tubs. I usually just wash off my brush to clean it up, but I don't use the acrylics in a wet way on my canvases usually. It's almost to the point of being impasto, which is thick paint. And I like that. I like the texture it creates. I like the expressiveness it gives. Okay, I think his mouth is slightly longer on this side, so I just want to make that more apparent. On this side is fine. There. Now I do want to go in with a little bit more detail on the eyes, so I'm going to use the turquoise to do this. And again, I'm just going to use it directly from as I took it out of the tub, so in its purest form. And even though on the picture I really can't see his pupil, I'm going to imagine where it is, because I want to create a little bit of life in his face. And I can also go and clean up the nostrils. And let's also go in over his eyebrows. Really do want to frame his eyes. We can use this color too to go over his hair a little bit. I am going to add a little bit of water so I get a little bit more fluidity with the hair. But right here, for example, it's very, very dark, so I'm going to go in there. And those two colors really contrast off each other and they complement each other. I really like how they play with each other on this portrait. I'm just going to put little flecks. And marks to imitate where his hair is and the direction of his hair. And then I'm not going to fill in all down here, but I am going to put a couple of lines so that you can see where his chin is, and also the darkest line in between his lips. And maybe just here where his nose is. His ear is. Okay. And his shirt just comes down here. We're going to leave this white. I'm going to darken just here by his eye. And maybe use the red on just a couple of areas where it's slightly darker, but I don't want to use too much of the turquoise. I'm going to put the white on the highlights. Just fill this in slightly. And just one little area that we left out right here, because I did it on one side, I should do it on this side too. And it is pretty dark on this side of his eye, so let's just fill that in a little bit too. And if we mix the red with the turquoise, we almost get a deep purple, which I can use for part of his lip right here. And I can use it a little bit here too. Okay, so now I want to use the bright pink for the background. We may have to do a couple of layers of this so it's more opaque than what we're getting right now. And really watch when you're doing the background to not lose the shape of his face on this side. And I'm going to mix up a little bit of the turquoise with the white. And this color looks really pretty with the pink. So we'll do a pattern on the background once the pink is dry. Okay, that's pretty. And I'm going to add a little bit of water so that the pattern will be easier to maneuver around on the pink. You don't want it too watery because you don't want it to become transparent. So if I just make a test here, that's perfect. And actually, let's fill in a little bit of his shirt. It's looking too stark when it's white. I'll just leave those really light yellow lines, which look like the seams to his t-shirt. There we go. And the pink is still a little bit tacky. Not too sure if I like that color on his forehead. I think it's a little bit too bright. Oh, it's a little bit too dark in contrast to the bright, so I'm going to just go over it a little bit. There we go. It's better. And I can still come in with this color, but it won't be as dark in comparison. I just want to correct the shape of this little nostril under here. And there is a reflective light underneath there, so I'm just going to add that. And I'm just going to make his lip here slightly on the larger side. There. Okay, so now we are ready for our pattern. I'm just going to take the number 8 brush and using our pretty turquoise color, I think we're just going to do scallops Now if you notice, I do hold my paintbrush when I'm doing this pattern quite far up the paintbrush, and I find it makes it easier to create a flowing pattern, and the shapes become more, not necessarily more uniform, but more fluid. I think if I held it closer to the tip, I'd be more concerned about how the shape was. And so I'm putting pressure when the brush comes down on the scallop and not on the top. So pretty. Okay, and let's go over to the other side. So we have to make it look like the scallop is behind Gerald. It's almost like a terracotta tiled roof, or the scales of a fish. I love it. Okay, just one last touch. Just wanted to lighten up this color for the back of his t-shirt to make it slightly brighter, and on half of his sleeve. There we go. And last but not least, a signature. Playing with acrylics is really fun, and you don't have to keep the colors realistic. Thank you so much for taking my acrylic class. I thoroughly enjoyed creating an expressive portrait for you all. I hope you'll give it a go too.